Well, welcome to the Crafting Character podcast. Steve Carter here, and in association with my good friends at Preaching Today and Food for the Hungry, I bring you a podcast that hopefully helps you get better at the craft of preaching and teaching and communicating the scriptures while always hoping that our character leads the way. And today I'm really excited because I get to bring on two people that have been on this podcast before. And many of you have told me how important and helpful A Church Called Tov by Dr. Scot McKnight and Laura Barringer was in that conversation to how you understand leadership and pastoring and actually being someone who is Tov. And many of you have often wondered, well, I want this to be true, but how do I actually ensure that our church and our culture is Tov? And I'm so excited because on September 19th, a new book by Dr. Scot McKnight and Laura Barringer called Pivot is dropping, and it's going to help you and your church actually be a church of Tov. So without further ado, Dr. Scot McKnight, Laura Barringer, two people I dearly love and respect. Welcome to the Crafting Character podcast.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be with you again. Good to be with Laura.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having us.
Oh, yes, for sure, for sure. Well, Laura, let me start with you because what I have heard is you really had this sense for A Church Called Tov and really wanted, your dad to start writing about it. You both had been talking about it. And you've shared a little bit about that the last time we were on the podcast together. I want to know, how did Pivot come to be?
So first of all, by I have heard, did you mean my dad told you that I was a pest?
I mean, I would say it a little, more Tov, but yes, exactly.
Yes, because that's the common thread. So Pivot came about because as groups and individuals, organizations, churches, whatever, had the chance to read A Church Called Tov and then digest it and absorb it, they started asking us, okay, so how do we do this? How do we form a culture of goodness? Or people would ask us, what are some red flags we should be looking for? Or how do I'm in a toxic culture. How do I change? How do I initiate the change? What if I'm a lay person and I'm far away from the influence of decision making? And initially, I would just look at them in conversation or interviews and just say, oh, I have no idea. I know what the problem is. I could just see it by the grace of God. And I'm really busy teaching, so I don't know how you go fix it. But over the course of time, those questions, they didn't go away. They became more and more frequent. And my dad was far more equipped to answer those at the beginning than I was. But we dove into those questions and had a lot of conversations with both men and women that are trying to form cultures of goodness, with men and women that we've talked to people that are building churches from the ground up that want to make sure they're Tov. We've talked to people that are lay people that want to help change the culture. And so through the course of those conversations and a lot of reading, a lot of research, Pivot is our best and most prayerful attempt to answer the questions that we had been most frequently getting.
I think that's really beautifully said, because I think Tov is the compelling why. And I think Pivot is that accessible, thoughtful how to embody a Tov culture. And I think you guys have done a fantastic job. Dr. McKnight, I'm curious for you. You have these 3 Ps, the priorities, the practices, and the powers. Talk about that and how it got funneled into those 3.
Yeah, part of Laura's answers, I'll back up just a bit, is that this is the 198th podcast on Tov and Pivot combined. So we've talked with a lot of people about this topic. So, just back and forth thinking different questions has led in most ways to how we framed it. I did the Bible and the theology stuff, of course, but so the P's. Okay, here's the total truth. We had, I think, 10 chapters. And I must have said this to Laura a dozen times. We can start this book with any of these chapters and let it flow from there, because all of them kind of are networked. But our editor, Steve, said, that's not going to work. So he came up with the word priorities. And then my brain, we're in a conversation on a Zoom session. And I said, then the others could be practices. And then I thought, well, the others are powers.
Yeah.
So we came up with 3, and it allowed us to sort of group the 9 topics that are involved in those chapters into a meaningful coherence of one theme in 3 ways, and then another theme in 3 ways, and another one. So that's how they came up. But frankly, all 9 of those chapters are networked with the other 8. They really do work together. You can't. And as a theologian, I wanted to start with grace. And, the Holy Spirit. Well, that's a theological approach to things. And people would just skip the chapter if you did that, because they're looking for pragmatics in this kind of book. So we started with what we thought were the 3 most significant dimensions of church life that need to be developed if a church is actually going to be transformed into Tov. And so we started with character, power, and example.
Yeah.
And every one of those is a year-long series of sermons. And even then, you're only going to touch on it, because all 3 of those are so important and so hard to practice in good ways. So we started with those, and I think then it worked together. The second one is more pragmatic, of what are the things you have to do. And this is where we benefited from a student who was sitting in the back of my class, and he was auditing, and it's a D-Min class, an intensive, 9 to 4 every day. And about Wednesday, he says, you got some pretty good ideas about Tov, but you're using all the wrong terms. And I said, what do you mean? He says, I have a PhD in organizational transformation. And he said, you need to read Edgar Schein, this important book. So Laura and I both read this book. Wow. And that sort of helped us frame some of the topics in the practices. So, but Schein didn't have the theology. So his work isn't for the church.
Yeah. Laura, I'm curious. You've attended, a handful of different churches over the years. You teach regularly in the classroom, and yet you have this love for the church. And you've seen the best of the church, and you've seen some of the worst up close. I'm curious, when there are cultures that are on the verge of toxic or are toxic, what have you found in the research that you did that was almost like surprised you? Like we can say, narcissism, we could say certain things about but as you were walking through this, was there something that just almost like, wow, I didn't think that? Maybe there's a couple of these chapters that you could say, Tov character, of course, that's really, but was there a chapter or a thought that just, I really didn't see that one coming, and now, man, this is so essential for a healthy culture?
2 things come to mind. One, I was greatly encouraged by research and by people that we've talked with that change is possible. It's possible. And people can have hope. We can all have hope that a toxic culture can be changed into one of Tov. The other piece of it that I think I learned, that I just grew in my own faith as we read and researched, was, okay, transformation is not going to happen by willpower. It's not going to happen by hiring really talented people or really educated or charismatic people, right? Ultimately, it's the work of God. That's the transformation. And that is probably the big idea that I have taken away from this whole process of pivot, is that it's listening to the Spirit, surrendering to where He leads, and letting Him do the work of transformation.
Wow.
And that probably, it's not something that you're going to read in the research, but that's the biggest takeaway that I have.
Yeah. That's so profound. And, you think, oh, of course. But I think, when I was reading this, and I think it like even hit me on, ambition. And there's like healthy ambition, I think, for me. And then there's unhealthy ambition. And there are these parts of like, for me to go, gosh, like, what is that really about? And if that goes unchecked, what could come of that? And in my own way, trying to almost consent to the reality, I have good ambition and I have unhealthy ambition. And where does that unhealthy ambition come from? And, trying to find the way to invite the Spirit into those spaces and process with mentors and my spouse and people in my life. But I think some of this is fascinating because we can use language that seems, of course, we want to reach more people. Of course, we want to do the most good. Of course, we want to. And yet it could be totally covered in an unhealthy form of ambition or power or scarcity. And you even guys at the beginning of the book have this amazing tree and roots motif and model that kind of like really sets the stage. Dr. McKnight, will you process that a little bit? Because I think that's a really helpful piece to the conversation.
Now, this started
with Steve, keep calling you Dr. McKnight.
I know, I get so nervous.
You're the only one who calls me that. My students never call me that. This started with Edgar Schein. He had a lily plants in a pond with roots that are invisible. The secret, and then Laura came up, I think, with the peach tree, I think.
Yeah, because we have one in our backyard and it's very unhealthy, so it's perfect for the illustration.
But the key thing for Edgar Schein that he points out is that there are a lot of invisible dimensions of what is actually going on in an organization and in a church. And what people see, let's say the leaves, the branches, the fruit, are what they see on Sunday morning on the platform. But what is behind closed doors? What are the things that are actually going on that are driving the invisible dimensions of this church? And I thought the easiest way to do this would be to compare the fruit of the Spirit with the manifestations of the flesh in Galatians 5. That just makes sense. And then we added like ambition. These things are actually involved in the manifestations of the flesh. But this is the key thing. Edgar Schein is the guru at MIT who goes to all the major organizations and his people to uncover let's say, the real culture of a business or a corporation or whatever, a firm. And they will spend sometimes 3 to 9 months at these places before they can come to terms with what's actually going on.
Wow.
So I wanted to point out some things that I thought no pastor will really admit, that greed, competition with other churches are the things that are actually driving them. And when that pastor is, let's say, competition, now let's just say that all three of us know of a pretty sizable church that had a pretty sizable pastor, and what was driving him, and what drives some of these mega church pastors. And competition, ambition is almost unchecked for some of these people and is invisible enough that even they don't realize this is what's driving them. When they hear that another church had a bigger event than they had, they kick into gear that we're going to do it better. That right there is a revelation, but no one admits that that's what's going on. So that was what I filled in below the surface of Laura's diagram. I think it is, yeah. So, and then, when follow Jesus and love God and love your neighbor are in the roots, are in the dirt, the soil that feeds the roots, different things grow on the tree. But when it's full of sickness and ambition and competition, then eventually the tree might look good, but the fruit's going to be sour, and it's eventually going to be revealed. So I think that Laura and I thought well with the tree image. So I think it really helps visualize what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think it really resonated, and it was such a great framework to start before we walked into the 9 chapters that break down. One of the things that I really, really appreciated about is after every chapter, there's a section, and it's getting to work, but there's a point where it says, do the hard work. And I just had this thought, like, man, I think at our elder meetings for the church that I'm a part of in Elgin and Rockford, Illinois, I was like, you know what? We've been talking a lot over the last couple of years since A Church Called Tov came out. We want to be a church, that is Tov. But sometimes it's like, how do we get there? And I thought these questions, man, every month at an elder meeting, we could just go one chapter at a time and just go slow. And over a meal, just process through. It just is the way I saw it happening. How do you envision Pivot making its way into the streams of churches? I mean, A Church Called Tov did really, really well. I think it's been so incredible to see how it's gotten in the hands of business leaders, pastors, elders. I mean, this resonated with people. But I think what you've done here is more than just resonated. It has made it profoundly accessible, which is really, really a kind thing for us church leaders. But what is your hope of how Pivot is used in the local church?
So I'm an educator. That's my background in training. And I don't start teaching any subject until I've assessed where my students are at. So I don't, with some, I need to know their data with their starting point so that I know where to take them. And I think that is such an exciting part of Pivot to me, is our Tov tool that my dad wrote the questions, so they're theologically, correct. And we ended up dividing them up into the circle of Tov, the important parts of what makes an organization or a person good, right? So there's questions about self-reflection questions, or questions for groups about how are we doing with putting people first instead of the reputation of our institution? How are we telling the truth? Are we justice driven, et cetera? I think I'm so excited for that because it offers individuals and teams, however churches or organizations want to use it, the opportunity to maybe do what's the most difficult of all, to accept the truth about where you are. But I think that's so exciting. That's where the transformation starts, is recognizing where do we need to grow? What is the biggest problem, and being able to identify it?
And I think that's really profound. And Scott, as you talked about too, I think that there are these hidden motivators that sometimes we can't necessarily address. And then sometimes, and you kind of allude to it with Stockholm syndrome, that you can see it, but man, if I speak up about it, I might be punished. Talk about that,
Yeah.
because there's a sense of people who, want that language, but then they don't even feel like they have the safety, the trust, it's almost better to be blind, have a willful blindness, a naivete, and just kind of turn because of the cost that will come from it.
Well, Laura's right about the Tov tool. And I was asked by a pastor to develop this. And I took each of the 8 categories in the in Tov book and just started asking questions about it. And then we worked it all together. But here's what I think is, Steve, slowly, people, leaders like you, can go with your elders and go through, let's say, one set of questions a month. And you may realize that we need another month on this. There can't be any hurry to get through the task. What we need is honesty and transparency so that the truth comes to the surface and that we discover the areas in the church that really need improvement. I think we ask some pretty hard questions of people. And what I mean hard, not hard to answer, but, is your church empathic or empathetic? How do you release people when you get rid of people? Do you lie about people when you release people? Do you lie about yourself? And if you do, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to admit this? And so I think the Tov tool is going to be really important for churches to use in order to find out what is actually in the soil, underneath the grass, feeding the roots of the tree that becomes the fruit. And we think it needs to be slow. And we also think that it needs to be profoundly safe for people to answer the questions with candor and transparency.
Yeah.
They need to know that they can say what they think. And the leaders of the church have got to move over and let the answers come to the surface. And then, instead of retaliating, which is so typical in narcissistic cultures and toxic cultures, they need to say, I've been a part of a culture being formed that makes people unsafe or has created this kind of toxicity. I need to deal with this. And that's what I think, Laura and we talked about this quite a bit. I think that that's going to be one of the most profound parts of the book, is the Tov tool. And it's not a normative test. You shouldn't be taking it and then scoring yourself. It's questions that should generate conversations among people in the church. And you may find out that in one category, let's say truth-telling, that you find out that you could only answer 2 questions in a 2-hour session because it generated so many things about the church that need to be discussed.
Yeah. No, I think that's my counselor often says, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I think that art of going slow. And I think, we want to digest it. We want to get our score. We want to win. We want to be better than, to the other part, the church and their Tov culture grade. We want to be like, that's not what this thing is. And it is, I think for senior leaders, I think for elder boards, and this is an invitation to do some incredible work, but really be honest about how your church really is. Not the shiny stuff, not what you post on Instagram, not, what's front facing on your website, not on the platform on a Sunday morning, but really what's happening behind the scenes, what can't be voiced and what needs to be voiced. I'm curious, Scott, when you think about New Testament churches, and you've done commentaries, some of my favorites. You wrote this and participated in the Second Testament, which is amazing. What do you think is the healthiest church that's represented in the New Testament? What would be the closest to a Tov church?
Yeah, I've never been asked this question. Never even thought about it.
Great question.
Okay,
my follow-up's even better. So
we're gonna rule out Corinth. Okay. Corinth gets last place. We don't know enough about Thessaloniki to really go much there. So, all right, there's some stuff there, but and Philippi doesn't have a lot. I think Philippi is pretty dang healthy.
Yeah.
And I think Ephesus is probably healthy. But that's only because we get these little letters about them. We don't know that much. But Rome has some. We don't learn that much about Rome because Paul hasn't been there, but he knows those people that he mentions in chapter 16. So many people. So Ephesus.
Well, take us there. How do you know? How do you know?
I think Capernaum is the best one.
Capernaum. Oh, okay. Yeah.
But why? Tell us why.
Yeah. Well, Capernaum, I mean, we don't know anything about it. This is where Jesus ministered with the people, and it was so powerful. But they in Capernaum, you can look right over to see Tiberias, where Antipas is, and Jesus calls him that fox. I'll go to Jerusalem and I'll die there. That's where prophets go. But I'm just saying, Capernaum is where Jesus was. There was healing. There was the teaching of the kingdom. They saw the fullness of the kingdom of God. But we'll say Ephesus.
Okay. I was thinking it's not mentioned very much, but I've always been so curious about Acts 13 and the church in Antioch and just the diversity that was there and the releasing and sending out. But man, I was thinking about that. And then second is if you could think of a couple leaders in the New Testament that really embodied. But you got your hand up.
Oh, I got.
Oh, you got an answer. Okay, yeah.
Okay, now this is kind of interesting. Look, we got Peter and Paul. We know all kinds of stuff about both of them, but it is very interesting how Paul treats Titus. Titus was Paul's reconciling friend, one of his co-workers. When Paul has problems in Corinth, which he had plenty of, and they did not like him. They didn't like how tall he was. They didn't like how he spoke. They didn't like how he treated money. They didn't like him. And he was so vulnerable with them in 2 Corinthians. Open up your heart to me. I've opened my heart to you. I mean, this is just not very manly of Paul in the first century. And the Romans didn't like this sort of thing. But when Paul has a problem in Corinth, he sends Titus. Now, why Titus? Titus was with Paul and Peter in Jerusalem in Galatians 2, 1-10. Titus witnessed the reconciliation of Peter and Paul in their respective missions. And it looks like Titus learned from this, the whole process of reconciliation. Now, he disappears for the first and second mission trips of Paul, but all of a sudden he shows up in the third mission trip, and Paul sends him to Corinth to do two things. Number one, to deliver the severe letter. Well, that's not fun to sit up and read this letter to churches that are basically rebuking them for the way they've treated him and disrespected, etc. And at the same time, his responsibility was to get them in order with the collection for the saints. How can you raise money with people when you're telling them that they're wrong? I think this is an amazing text. So for me, Titus is at the top of the list of a Tov leader in the New Testament, Tover than Paul and Peter.
Well, and think about this. I don't think if I were to ask 100 people in the church, and if I don't think Titus would be in their top 10, and it's like, oh, it's going to be John, it's going to be Peter, it's going to be Paul, it's going to be, and you think about some of the most fascinating characters and leaders are the ones like Ananias, not the one who stole money from the church, bad dude, but the one who went to go see Paul, or Saul at the time. Like these leaders that you don't know much about, but what you see in them are those elements of of goodness and reconciliation and speaking the truth. Laura, I'm curious for you, as you've kind of, working your way through this from the theology side, the research side. One of the things I respect about you, and you challenge me, to be honest, really, is you are a fierce truth teller. And I sometimes I'm like, I get a little nervous, you know what I mean? Because I'm like, I have a little Ferris Bueller in me. I want to like make everyone like me. But like, I am so incredibly inspired by your strength to tell the truth. And you just do this. I just feel like when it's online or whether in your book or whether just talking with you, I feel, and I feel like that's oftentimes something that's not celebrated in churches, especially when it's coming from women at times. And I think that's such a miss on so many levels. I'm curious where you learned that fire and to trust your voice, to trust your gut, to trust that Spirit's leading. Where did you learn that?
It's funny you say that. I don't know. I don't always think of it as a strength. I've tried to back off and be a little bit more gentle. My therapist says less judgmental because you don't know half these people you're calling out or 90% of them. So I think there's a fine line between, there's a line, right, between telling the truth. And I was able to do that in the Willow situation because I knew the truth and I knew of what I was speaking. And I felt it needed to be said. Somebody needed to stand up for the wounded people that were getting run over. But there's a difference between people, situations I may not know. And I've tried to be more careful with that. But I don't know. It comes from a place of this is not right. And somebody needs to say something. And I feel like I'm a person that could say it. And so I will. But it really like stirs me up when I see a church or an organization, whomever, trying to bury the truth and hurting people in the process. And in that case, I feel like the right thing to do is to speak up.
Yeah. I think our family, Laura and Mark and Chris and I, developed this over Willow Creek. I'm a professor. I give my opinions in class and I write books, but I didn't write books that were critical of the church.
Yeah.
So the Willow story became for us so almost like a family challenge to speak up, stand up and speak up, stand up and speak out. And we learned the good side and the bad side of this in a couple ways. We felt like we were telling the truth. I remember thinking when I wrote my first blog post about Willow Creek, I thought, I told the truth. I think I told the truth, doggone it. All right. But we also learned that people didn't like that. I mean, I even had a student say to me, I think that's too harsh. And I thought, I told the truth. The truth is harsh here. This is what happened. But the other side of it is it's pretty easy to speak out in situations once you've gained that platform about things you really don't know about.
Yeah.
And I haven't been one that goes after people very much on Twitter. I don't do that. And I never really have done that. Every now and then I have. It's amazing how much backlash you get when you think you've told the truth. But I do think we have to be really careful about speaking against people we don't know anything about. And then the other thing I've experienced in this is even when you are thoroughly convinced that you've told the truth, someone else may describe that same situation in a completely different way. And you go, oh, well, I think you're wrong, but
Yeah.
I know you really think you're right. And I've seen this. Every place I've ever worked, I've seen this sort of thing happen. So I think as a family, we developed that. And then Laura's not as active. At least I don't know this.
Dad, you're not even on Twitter, so
I don't know if you're doing much on Twitter, but I do know what Threads is.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, and I think what I found from your family is less calling out, but profoundly inviting people and calling them up and calling them in. And it's amazing. Like, I think like the Church Called Tov, it allowed churches to, call them up. There's a higher standard for pastors. There's a higher standard for how we carry the name of Christ. And I think Pivot, it really calls us inward to say, hey, let's be really, really honest. Let's take an actual litmus test and say where we are and what we need to do. And the Tov tool, it's just amazing.
When we were writing Tov, I would tell Laura, we got to find some positive stories. There's too many negative stories.
it was hard to find positive stories.
Yeah.
But also, positive stories don't make the news. So you can't like Google and research for them.
It's Titus. And the other thing is, you find a positive story, and then 2 years later, you find out the guy was a total creep.
Yeah.
But what Laura and we talked about this. It's easy to write an expose. It was harder to write a book that would be redemptive. And our editor at Tyndale, named Dave, helped us rearrange the chapters so that it moved in a redemptive direction.
Yeah.
And I think that is what flowed into Pivot, that redemptive direction.
You feel it. You really, really do. And I felt like I could taste it. I could see it. It made like this sense of urgency, but also the recognition it's going to take time for this to actually not just be something we aspire or hope for, but actually something we're going to pivot and work towards, And I'm also curious, when you write a book about character and goodness, do you feel like there's like a pressure on your back? Like, it's like the guy who wrote the book of virtues. And then, to your point, Scott, like a couple years later, you find out he had massive character flaws, or, you like, do you feel this like, man, we're speaking up about this stuff, but man, it's like, this makes us have to live it. It's almost like a healthy accountability for yourself. And how are you both, walking in this, and with chapter 2 really being on Tov character? What does that look like for both of you, whether in the classroom, whether in, leading, whether in the teaching, and even walking through difficult situations? How do you guys do that?
Yeah, it is heavy. I do think about that a lot. The side note, today I was teaching, we were talking about rules and being kind to each other in the classroom, and, blah, blah, blah. Most of the kids are like, well, I'm not going to hit people. And one of my students raises his hand and is like, I'll tell you where you find all the rules. You find them in Leviticus. I was the only person that knew what he was talking about. I was like, that is one of the funniest things I've ever heard at kindergarten today. And the other kids are like, what are you talking about? It does feel weighty. It feels like if I'm writing about character, like I better be a person of character. And the place that I get to practice that most often is where I'm at from 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. every day is my classroom. And we talk about emulation a lot in Pivot. I want to be the kind of teacher that my students can emulate. I want to create a culture of Tov. I can talk to them about kindness. And if I'm not kind to them, what, that's not character. What is that? That's not integrity. So I try to model that for them as much as I can. But again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. Where does transformation and character come from? Ultimately, it comes from listening to the Spirit and surrendering to where He's leading. And I get it wrong all the time, but thankfully there's a God of redemption for all of us.
Yes, there is. That's awesome.
And I think that it's not good if you don't think you need to work on this. I'm almost 70 years old, so I don't have as many years to work on it as other people do, probably. All right, so I think that is important for me, Steve. My life is a life of writing and studying the Bible. That's what I like to do. And writing these everyday Bible studies on every book of the New Testament, where basically I have to come up with a sermon every day. And sometimes it's 2 passages, so it's 2 of them. And every one of those things, I can't just write a commentary. That's pretty distant. I'm also trying to mold it so that it becomes a reflection for life. And the minute I move in that direction, it's always convicting. All right, so right now I'm looking at 2 Corinthians. Well, today I wrote on 2 passages in 2 Corinthians 8-9 about giving, donations. Well, Paul has a theology of giving. And he's concerned about the poor in Jerusalem, and he doesn't want to coerce them, but he's not afraid to persuade them and to tell them the Macedonians are doing really well. How about you guys? So those sorts of things just make you think about, how do I try to motivate people? What am I doing? It's easy to try to make people feel guilty. But it's hard to, let's say, use the positive as a way of motivating. It's much more difficult. And I think Paul struggles with this. He's trying to be good and can get kind of crotchety at times.
Well, and this is a great setup for my last question. And there's the whole section on power. The 3 chapters. I mean, I had to read it slow. And one kind of drawing that was done by Janet Hamburg, it talks about these stages of power. And then you talk about stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and that they lead by, and stage 1 is force, and stage 2 is rules, and they inspire by, and just the chart is unbelievable. It's page 78. I mean, every leader should sit in it. And I found myself going, okay, where am I in this? And where am I on it? Like, where am I truly? And I was like, okay, here's where I'm at. And then I was like, I wonder what Laura and Scott would say about Paul. Where would Paul be in this list? Where, and then I felt a little bit better maybe about myself, but then I was like, where would, if you think about the Tituses, and I'm like, oh man, I got a long way to go. That sense of, man, really those words, what am I leading by? How am I inspiring people? What are required, and how am I managing? I mean, that and the questions you ask about that is worth the book itself. Everything in the book is amazing. It is such a crucial read. But there were so many moments where I just had to like, gosh, that messes with me, and then how do I go to the next stage in just one of those areas, and in some ways I might be leading by one of those stages, but then I'm inspiring by another one, and it might be up or down, and I found myself really, like, again, to your point, Laura, just bringing that before the Lord and just going, gosh, like I need to bring this to my mentors and really dive into it. So my question really with that is, where in some of those church leaders, like Paul, for instance, where do you think he would be?
I'm going to settle in here and forget that I'm on a Zoom. I love this.
Okay, Laura. Pivot.
Which was the best. That was the best use of social media. I was dying. Pivot, going up the stairs.
Do you want to know what's really funny about it is when we went to name the title of the book, we were like back and forth. And my dad finally was like, I know, Pivot. And I said, Dad, we cannot name the book Pivot. That is the most famous Friends episode. Everyone's going to think of The Couch. And he's like, don't worry, no one's ever heard of that show. I've never seen it. They won't think of Friends. And so that's where he started. And he's now acting out.
Yes.
Oh, and it was just purely a lark. I said to Chris, "Hey, I'll carry these books up the stairs. You take a video of it." And then it turned okay.
And by the way, my wife and I are big fans of Chris. We just we don't know her. Like, we just on Twitter. She is so fun to follow. She is awesome. So please tell her that.
I will. Okay, now I think when you look at Janet Hagberg's 6 stages and you look at the Apostle Paul, I think if you do lead by and inspire and require and manage by, I think you would find different strategies for Paul. So the theory that they all line up and that's how you do it, I'm not sure Paul did that. And there's some things I'm not sure about. But for instance, he led a lot by persuasion. But my guess is that Paul modeled integrity in ways that were unbelievable. Now think about this guy who, if you read 2 Corinthians chapter 11, you realize this guy got beat up a bunch of times.
Danger.
And they didn't have stitches and go to the doctor. And I mean, so he had to be, cut up and scars and maybe, I don't know, I'm sure his body was beat up. So there was something about his body probably that communicated everything. And he clearly was a man of hope and consistency and honesty. And he was a mentor. I think he had all these coworkers. To have all those coworkers, you can't just be a persuader. You got to have people around you that want to be with you. And he had very close relationships with Timothy and Titus, Epaphroditus and these others. So all the people around him, I would say Paul was a stage 5 who could probably operate in stage 6 at times. But in the mission that he was involved in, there was so much junk going on. The wisdom part for Paul probably only happened in his times alone with Titus and Timothy. But he, there aren't very many people who can say with integrity, copy me. That's the Greek word. Copy me as I follow Christ. I mean, that takes chutzpah to say. Yeah. And then, of course, it's been repeated for 2,000 years because he said it. So I would put Paul at a stage 5. And I think it's really unfortunate that so many of the critical Christians, the deconstructors, do not understand how emotional and feeling-centered this apostle was. And I just wish they'd read 2 Corinthians chapters 1 through 2 and then skip chapters 2 through 2:13. Get him worried about Troas. And then skip all the stuff because he got so happy. And then go to chapter 7 and read the end of that story. It's amazing. It is a very vulnerable apostle. This was no tight anus kind of guy, Is that okay on your podcast to say?
I mean, all the words to pick. Did you pick that?
That's not what he was. I mean, he was a very emotional, caring, even volatile guy because, he wore his feelings on his sleeves.
Yeah.
They all knew how he felt.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Friends, I cannot stress enough the importance of this book. And I think even if you're a student ministry and you've got a team of key volunteers, this is awesome. It's great learning. It's great thing to process what kind of ministry and how you're empowering students. College ministry. You're on a college campus and you're building a team. and you're really mentoring younger leaders, this is an incredible book to get them to understand something I wish I would have been able to read when I was in Bible college, for any senior leadership team, for any elder board, and especially for you senior pastors, teaching pastors, executive pastors who are directing ministry leaders, directing volunteers. This is an essential read, and I cannot stress that enough. I bought a bunch of copies. I'm actually going to give them away, so be on the lookout for that, because I really, really believe in this. I love the idea and the compelling why of A Church Called Tov, and this book though is the next level. It for me made me realize it's possible. And like you said, Laura, it beautifully, we can change. And as Scott, you said, it is redemptive. And this just gave me a lot more hope for the kind of church I want my kids to experience, the kind of church I want to believe is possible, the kind of bride that would have a deconstructing world, a cynical world, a critical world to look at and say, I don't agree with that, but those are really good people, and those are good leaders, and they are who they say they are, and they're making me question and think and wonder a lot. And I feel like you both have given us a tool, the Tov tool. You've given us a means and a way to really be a church that Christ would be proud of. So thank you to you both. I hold you both in such like a dear space in my heart, just because of who you both are to me. But honestly, thank you for this book. It's an incredible resource.
Well, thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah. So where can people find you? I mean, Laura, where can people find you? Because I mean, again, I think people should follow you. I think people should know you. You are an amazing kindergarten teacher, but man, you are so much more. So where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter. That's where I'm probably most active, or Instagram. And I do have a new website, laurabarringer.net. So you can find me there too.
Laura, you have Barringer. A website?
Dad, you've seen it. I sent it to you.
Oh, okay. So it's the same thing that you had before.
And right. And we also have a website, churchcalledtov.org.
Awesome. And a church called Tov.org, will that be pushing all the stuff for Pivot as well?
Yes. There's
perfect.
Yeah.
Good. And Scott, where can people find you?
In my library.
In your library. Well, where can people find the Substack? Because that is
Substack, Scot McKnight Substack. Yeah, that's my daily, almost every day I have something on Substack. And then I have a Twitter account and a Facebook and an Instagram and a Threads.
Yeah. Well, get on the Substack. Yeah, get on that Substack, because it's fantastic. And I don't know how you pump out so much good content as you do. But I'm grateful. So friends, thank you so much for who you are. And please, September 19th, Pivot, the priorities, practices, and powers that can transform your church into a Tov culture, drops September 19th. Go get this book, pre-order it, get it, and buy multiple copies. Get them for your elders, get them for your team. It's going to be a gift. Thanks for tuning into the Crafting Character podcast, and we will see you next time. Grace and peace, everyone.